The Philadelphia Eagles just made the smartest move of the offseason on Monday. We'll get into why coming up next, as well as Mock Draft Monday right here on Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome on in, Eagles fans. I'm Louis DiBiase, co-host of the Locked On Eagles podcast. You can also find my work over at Bleacher Report. Same with my co-host Gino Camilleri, our scouting director. On today's edition of Locked On Eagles, DeVonta Smith got a bag, and it was perfectly timed by the Eagles a week before the draft. Speaking of the draft, we've got Mock Draft Monday. Only 2 more before the 2024 NFL Draft. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers, you're going to get $150 back in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 back, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So, Gino, we said this actually when they signed Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, even over the Bryce Huff move and Saquon Barkley. Like, getting Chauncey might have been the move of the offseason. It's what they desperately needed on defense. But of all the moves in-house, outside the free agent pool, I think today locking up DeVonta Smith was the smartest move this team has made all offseason. Because to me, the biggest key to sustaining success for this Eagles team long-term is to keep the trio of Jalen Hurts, DeVonta Smith, and A.J. Brown together. And now all 3 are locked up long-term. DeVonta gets a 3-year deal worth $75 million a year. After that 5th-year option of $15 million goes into his bank account. So that's a really big haul for DeVonta. $25 million a year puts him tied for 4th, right with A.J. Brown. But honestly, Gino, I think it's probably an underpay for DeVonta because you look at this market that's about to blow up with the Jalen Waddles of the world, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins. Those guys are going to get paid, and I think DeVonta could have got more if he held out. But for the Eagles, team-friendly, and they got the deal done early, which was smart as always.
First things first, it was never anybody other than number 6. It was always DeVonta Smith. He was the pick. He was made in a lab to be a Philadelphia Eagle, and he's going to be a Philadelphia Eagle through the year 2028, Lou. And you talk about paying these guys ahead of the curve. Howie Roseman, if nothing else can be said about him when he is no longer a general manager, one thing you could put at the top of his resume is that he took care of his own, arguably better than any general manager in the sport. He will pay his guys if he deems them worthy of a contract extension, and he will keep them here for 15 years like Brandon Graham has been.
Ideally so,
He did that with Jason Kelsey, and he did that with Lane, and now he's doing it with Landon Dickerson and Jordan Mailata, and now you have Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown and a young DeVonta Smith all locked up, Lou. This is how you team build. You find young talent in the draft that comes in. They understand what it is to be an Eagle above everything else. Their mental makeup, their will, their drive to win. That's why DeVonta was made to be an Eagle, even outside of his skill set. And what is his skill set, Lou? It's arguably a 1A, 1B receiver skill set that you.
I don't even think it's arguable.
He's a number one guy in any other team outside of Philadelphia that has AJ there. You paid him before Jamar Chase is going to get it back. You paid him before Justin Jefferson is get it back. This is Howie Roseman's MO. He's going to beat you to the curve. He's going to set the curve. And then in 2 years from now, we're going to be looking back and saying, good job, Howie Roseman. You already got those guys on a bar. Look at Jalen Hurts' deal. Already a bargain. Look at Landon Dickerson's deal that was made 3 months ago. Already a bargain.
Dude, the Smith and Brown contracts, they're going to look like right now they're both tied for 4th, which was smart, by the way. They needed to keep these deals pretty similar to
happy, Lou.
To keep the peace. It's wide. The wide receiver position is the closest thing in the NFL to what we have in the NBA, and you got to keep those guys happy, especially when there's 2 stars together. So it's not a coincidence they're both making $25 million a year once that contract goes into play. So you had to get that done. Right now, that's tied for 4th in the league. But Gino, as we've mentioned, all these names that are about to get paid soon, that's going to be like tied for 7th to. I mean, they're probably still going to be top 10 contracts, but they're not going to be top 5. And again, for the Eagles, that's why they try to get ahead of these deals early, and it's so smart. But it also just shows you who DeVonta Smith is, because he could have absolutely waited out this contract and got more money once those other guys get paid. He could have said, I want to be featured somewhere else where there's not two other elite targets. I want to get a volume like Justin Jefferson in Minnesota or Jamar Chase in Cincinnati, because I think, as you do too, DeVonta Smith could be a top 5 receiver in football in an offense like that where he is the guy, right? Mm-hmm. And now, instead, he signs with the Eagles because for that dude, it's all about winning football. And that's who he's always been. When they were a run-heavy team in 2021, when he was sharing the load in 2022 with Brown and Goddard, in 2023 when everything was falling apart, he was one of the guys trying to keep things together. Like, this is who Smith is. So it's not surprising he made the deal early, but he could have been selfish, and it would have been justifiably so.
I think it goes back to that environment of being in a room in Alabama with the guys like Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs in that offense.
And Jalen Waddle, they had 4 of them. That's a good point, yeah.
I mean, outside of just that, like all of the talent you see there, it's like, yeah, we kind of have to give up our own egos to go and win this thing, right? And that's what
That's a really good point. Yeah,
it's a great point. Like,
do you know a guy that went to a smaller school might not be willing as much to deal with this if like they were the guy, big fish in a smaller pond?
Absolutely. I mean, you see that all around. I mean, look at
great point.
Pittsburgh right now. They have the whole George Pickens, Deontay Johnson ordeal that they were going with. And it's like, are those guys even to the caliber of the 2 guys we're talking about in Philly? Absolutely not. And we've seen it better than anybody. Go back to the T.O. years. Like, we know what a drama-ridden room is. And I think A.J. Brown has gotten a lot of just bad things said about him when it comes to, he might want to leave. Like, yeah. No, I think he's bought in just as much. And I think this is a whole collaborative effort that they understand now more than ever, Lou. The offense is what is winning them a Super Bowl. They're investing all of this.
It's top 5 money at almost every position. Multiple contracts. Yeah.
It goes through the offense. Jeffrey Lurie, that's what he wanted. All those years ago when he got rid of Doug Peterson, that was the next moniker. We want to be this offense that can just explode and take over the sport. Well, they're getting there, Lou. And the thing about DeVonta that I'm very happy of is that you are finding players like DeVonta in the draft, like AJ via a trade, in multiple different ways. And if they're good players, you are paying them. There's never these situations, Lou, where you're like, the Eagles got to franchise this guy for 2 years, and then we're going to see if they extend him.
Look what Dallas is doing with CeeDee Lamb. I mean, they're just dragging their feet, and they didn't want to pay Amari Cooper either. And it's like, why did you invest all this, contract money and draft picks into these 2 guys to only have them for a year or 2? And then when they didn't pay Cooper, it's like, okay, they're going to probably pay Lamb, and now they're not even paying Lamb. So I'm with you, man. Like, for the Eagles, they keep things simple now. And I think DeVonta Smith, honestly, was the start of that new simplified approach, even in the draft. Like, that was the first pick where Howie finally said, screw it, I'm going to start just taking kids from the best schools that are the best players from Alabama. Like, that really was that first pick. There was some issues with, or concerns about him being an outlier with his weight, but outside of that, it was a pretty obvious pick, and I think that's when Howie really started to stop making it so hard on himself. And like, DeVonta was a culture setter. That was really when the new era started.
You said a lot of things there that I kind of want to tie all together, and it really goes down to what Howie Roseman changed after that 2020 draft, where he wrote on that note, he said, do they love football? Are they healthy? And can they run? DeVonta Smith, you said it, Lou. He is a culture setter. He is one of those guys. Is he Kelvin Johnson, who's built in a lab and has these freakish, outlandish measurables and nobody can guard him 1-on-1 or even 2-on-1? Absolutely not. But is he an outlier that Howie Roseman saw enough good tape on in Alabama? I mean, winning the national championship game, winning the SEC championship multiple times for you, coming up in the biggest moments. Lou, you tweeted out today, who's been the biggest performer for you in the playoffs over
3 years? It's easily been
DeVonta Smith. It's
over 400 yards in 5 playoff games. Yeah.
You pay that kid because of what he did in Alabama, because of what he did on the football field. If you are a draft pick of the Philadelphia Eagles, you walk 6 out there, you put him in front of the room, in front of that rookie symposium that they do, and you say, you want to be a successful player? Look at this kid. He looks like he should be running hurdles with Devin Allen in the Olympic trials.
And yet he's one of the greatest college receivers of all time. And that's the thing,
like in the NFL too.
The NFL hasn't even, and that's why I think he's still underrated in this league. We haven't gotten to see nuclear Heisman DeVonta Smith when Jalen Waddle went down, because he can't do that in this offense ever to keep everybody else happy, and because you have so many other stars. And that's why I think this is, even at $25 million a year, it's a complete steal. As you mentioned, like, he's been a playoff stud. I mean, he's had 1,000 yards in pretty much all 3 years, just barely missed it the first year. Again, despite being one of 3 studs in that passing attack, despite in year 1 having a quarterback that wasn't developed yet in a run-heavy approach. I mean, he's an absolute star, and this was, to me, one of the most obvious moves to be made, and I'm glad it got done, because I was getting, I don't know if I was overthinking a little bit, but the longer time waited was passing, the more nervous I was getting.
And you have the right to get nervous. I totally see
just because I don't want to lose that guy. Honestly, I'd have prioritized him over A.J. Brown if he had to choose one. Luckily, they're not going to do that, but...
But Howie is also that guy, Lou, where he's like, if he loves his guys... And he knows he's got one, he's going to take care of his own.
Especially at a premier position in the passing game, which, of course, we know how important that is for this team.
If you're a top-level player, why wouldn't you want to come to Philadelphia? One, you're either going to get a contract extension here, or two, you're going to have an unbelievable year and go somewhere else, like the DeAndre Swifts, the TJ Edwards. How many guys are getting bags because of their performances in Philadelphia? Hats off to Six. Hats off to the team building element. And hats off to watching the tape, because if you just put down the measurables of what this kid was and said you're going to take him at the 10th overall pick, 50 years ago, they would have sent you to the gulag in the USSR. Now you're paying this kid a $25 million contract extension, and you have one of the better offenses, easily the best offense in the division for the next 5 years, and you have continuity. I mean, that's great to know that you have on paper your quarterback, 2 wide receivers, your running back, your whole offensive line is basically taking.
Oh, your offense is locked up for the long term.
We got to go take care of in the draft.
Yep, for sure. And we got Mock Draft Monday coming up, so we're going to do some defense for sure. One more fun stat, though, before we take a break on DeVonta Smith. He recorded a career-high plus 10.4 receptions over expected last year. This is per Next Gen Stats. It's 5th most in the NFL. Since he's come into the league in 2021, Smith has caught plus 25.9 receptions over expected. That's 2nd most in the league over that span, behind only Justin Jefferson. So when it comes to elevating a team, DeVonta Smith is one of those guys. He is a wide receiver 1. The Eagles got 2 of those boys locked up long term. Wish I could tell 2020 Lou that was going to be a reality. But we're here. DeVonta Smith, long-term contract. He has been signed. He's going nowhere outside of Philadelphia. Coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, Mock Draft Monday. 2 more before the 2024 NFL Draft. Gino and I, we have a new approach to this draft. We'll get into what it is coming up next. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast were brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and to level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day, guys. It's Locked On's NFL Mock Draft Live special. We're releasing that April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to hear the local experts of Locked On, including Gino and I, picking for every NFL franchise with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle as well. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft on April 17th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, streaming live on Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or that free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So it's Mock Draft Monday, and Gino and I have almost taken every angle to this thing that we can. But Gino, with 2 shows left, I wanted to do something new, and it's I think there's been a lot of draft philosophy talk over the last few weeks about, because everybody's getting ready for what approach their team's going to take, and you just hear this buzzword thrown around every single year, and it drives me crazy. GMs will say it, fans will say it. anybody to sound smart, teams should draft best player available. BPA, anything else. If you force need, it's a stupid move. Teams don't operate that way, or at least the good teams don't. And I always roll my eyes because it's never that black and white with the draft. Positional value goes into play, the depth of the class, long-term needs, short-term needs, BPA, that all plays a part. So I hate that black and white angle, but I do want to take that black and white approach to this draft. I want to say, okay, let's say teams actually drafted for BPA. What would that draft look like? So that's what we're going to do today.
As somebody who team building is quite literally all I research 24/7. I mean, that's what I look at. Like DeVonta Smith getting signed today. That's a huge step in the right direction. But you look at, was that pick best player available? 100%. But was it also a need? 150%.
Sure.
The Eagles needed a wide receiver very, very bad. But was he also the best player available on said team's board? That's how you have to look at it. Because every team is going to evaluate every player in a completely different manner. But at the same time, let's go back to the old school. If you run a 4-3, you run a 3-4, your positions might be a little bit different. If you only run press man on the back end and you draft a zone cover corner, well, you get the Byron Maxwell situation.
That's another good point, Gino. Like scheme and like style of player is another thing. There's just so much to it, and that's why you're never just going to say, well, we need a corner really bad. I'm not ever saying you reach for a need. Like if you need a receiver badly, but he's 10 spots lower on your board than a corner, I'm not saying don't take the corner. But if it's, this guy's ranked 1 and your other guy's ranked 2, but at that first position, you already have 3 young pillars, and the second one, you don't have anything, I think there you prioritize the needs. So I, again, think people just sometimes take it to an extreme black and white approach. So that's why on this mock, we're going to do BPA, though. And I think with the Eagles, they kind of do have some flexibility where BPA can be a big part of their philosophy, Gino, because outside of corner, and you could even make the argument they don't desperately need corner like in the past years, they've needed other positions. But I don't really think there is one thing that like they have to have in this class.
They need to get legitimately good ball players on the defensive side of the ball is about the only thing that I'm going to say. And let's just talk about last year for a second. Let's look at Jalen Carter, for example. I mean, do you realistically have to make that pick? Do you have to take an interior defensive lineman at that spot? No. But did you take?
You could have justified you have Fletcher Cox, Milton Williams, and Jordan Davis. Like, you don't need that.
You cleared away, got the best player available, but it also was at a position that you had quite a backlog at. But at the same time, does the blue chip element supersede that drop off to the next position? And that's the conversations that happen in draft rooms all the time. Now, if this thing sets up like it does with the board that we currently have, I think the Eagles are in a pretty good position.
Yeah, for sure. And so, Gino, I believe I had the first round pick last time. So you have the luxury of taking this 22nd overall pick. And if the board did fall this way, I think they might consider a trade down. But let's say they do want to say, we're going to go BPA at 22, and there isn't really another team that wants to move up here because it takes 2 to tango. You've got a couple defensive tackles at the top of this board. Johnny Newton from Illinois, Byron Murphy from Texas. You got Nate Wiggins from Clemson, Cooper DeJean from Iowa, Graham Barton, who's a really good interior offensive lineman from Duke, who's tested amazing this offseason. If your approach again was BPA here, what would you be thinking?
I think the best player available on this board is Byron Murphy currently.
Yeah.
I think that far and away, he's just in a tier above these guys, like tier 1A in my opinion. And let's say you draft him, you have to replace Fletcher Cox for one. You don't know the future of Milton Williams. Do you have another 3 tech that can complement Jalen Carter? Or you just have the best interior defensive lineman duo in the NFL. But that's back to our team building moniker here, Lou. Could you have made the argument that you take Cooper DeJean or a Nate Wiggins at a position that you have way bigger of a need?
For sure.
Absolutely. But is Byron Murphy that much better than those guys? In my opinion, I would personally take him. In the Eagles team building perspective, do they invest in the trenches more than they should have? Absolutely. Would that be a pick that you could see happening? 100%. And Byron Murphy, I think he's drafted maybe the number 1 defensive lineman off the board in total. That's my out there, like going to get drafted higher than Jared Verse, higher than Latu, higher than Dallas Turner. I think that 3 tech position, those guys are money makers. You see the contract extensions that have been put out there. You see where Jalen Carter was picked. He's going to be up there. And if you can land him, Lou,
Yeah.
I don't care what you say. BPA all day. You take that kid.
Yeah, so that's a BPA pick that I actually like because I would be pretty upset if they took him over Nate Wiggins, but I would also in a vacuum like the pick because I don't personally believe Jordan Davis is ever going to be an elite 3-down player at this position, and I think Murphy with Jalen Carter would make a lot of sense. I would be, and I've said this on the show before, I'd be far more happy with a defensive tackle in round 1 than an edge or an offensive lineman. So that BPA pick I actually do like. The options, though, if this was a live reaction and they took him over Nate Wiggins and Cooper DeJean, I wouldn't be extremely upset, but I'd probably roll my eyes and say this just still kind of feels again like overkill. And I don't even, there's a huge gap between Byron Murphy and a Nate Wiggins from a BPA perspective, but I like the pick for this exercise for sure. And even if that was the pick in real life, I think I'd be pretty happy. I'm on the clock here at 50. This is the one I would not be happy with at all because you've invested now 3 picks
I love
on the interior of your offensive line in the first 3 rounds. Of course it played out this way, and of course I have this pick. So they took Landon Dickerson in the second round of 2021 to replace Jason Kelsey. Then they did it again in 2022 with Cam Jurgens. Then they took Tyler Steen last year. If they take another interior offensive lineman because it's BPA, I'm going to lose my mind, and especially if it's this guy, Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon. The player himself, I really like him, but it's like it just would be so redundant at this point to take another center and then say, well, Cam Jurgens has been good at right guard anyway. It's like, sure, but I'd lose my mind at this one.
I'm really glad it played out this way, 1, because it gave me a much-needed laugh. 2, because I legitimately think this is a situation that's going to play out, that there's going to be some really good offensive linemen on the board there. Like, I mean, we could be talking about Patrick Paul. We could be talking about, I mean, you could go Kingsley Suamatia could fall to 50, right? And there's going to be some, like, let's say this plays out, and Adrian Cooper's sitting on the board, and you're like, I would take Adrian Cooper because I really don't have that guy. And it played out perfectly that you take JPJ. Now, is he on the board at 50? I don't know. I want to know what has happened since his first round fall.
I was going to say, he was seen as like a top 25 pick for a while.
This is the Oregon narrative. I'm not going to get into the whole bias, but you make that pick all day, and you don't care if it's not. He is the best player available in that situation, but from a fan perspective, you're probably going to be a little bit upset at that point. And I mean, let's go back to this same situation back in, when was JJ 2019 when they had that 50th and 52nd or 53rd pick when they take Miles Sanders, right? And you're like, oh man, could we really like land potentially Mecole Hardman here? No, we can't even land Mecole Hardman. We can't get DK Metcalf. We land JJ Arcega-Whiteside. So it's like maybe sometimes drafting the best player is better than trying to outsmart yourself like they did a couple years ago with JJ.
Sure. I just think and again, this is why I don't always like BPA, because you have a lot of young pillars on the interior that you've invested in already. And unless you think Tyler Steen's the heir apparent to Lane Johnson in a year at right tackle, then you're already admitting one of those guys is going to be a long-term backup, and we know that's not Jurgens or Dickerson. So not saying Tyler Steen is a reason you don't make any sort of moves, but after just 1 year, the dude was essentially going to be your second-round pick if you didn't trade down. To do this, and again, then what do? Is Cam Jurgens a right guard, and then neither pick you made at Dickerson or Jurgens' spot ends up becoming the real plan, and you just kind of keep making things work on the line? I don't know. I wouldn't love that, but this is, again, the strategy that I think this is working out perfect for exactly what I'm trying to get across.
That's exactly what we wanted to do today. And people are going to be so mad. Oh, you should have made X, Y, and Z pick. People, we do all of these to try and give you a bunch of different looks at this thing. And I'm sure you've probably done 1,000 mock drafts in your own right. And at the end of the day, Howie Roseman is the one making the pick. And we know that he loves the trenches more than anything. So it's very on brand, those 2 first picks. This one, Lou. Yeah,
I was going to say, you got 53.
Kind of lines up pretty well here for us. So right after that selection, I thought we were going to be in a little bit of a bind with Trey Benson potentially being the quote-unquote best player available on the board. He got picked, then Leonard Taylor goes. So now you're sitting here with Adrian Cooper, Chris Braswell, Cam Kinchins, Patrick Paul, Jalen Polk. Adrian Cooper is a fringe first-rounder all day. Somebody tweeted this, and I thought it was a perfect way to look at it. 10 years ago, Adrian Cooper's a first-round pick. Teams just don't value off-ball.
It's probably a top 10 or top 15 pick like 15 years ago.
Without a doubt. I mean, that freakish athleticism, the ability to cover, the ability to blitz, the ability to get after the quarterback, the ability to kind of translate into whatever you want him to be at the next level, you make that selection and you hope for the best in the first round. But now those guys fall, and you could luck into the best linebacker in the draft. I don't know what your second favorite guy is. To me, it's if you could get Junior Colson, I think that's another good name for you. But Edgerrin Cooper, if you pick JPJ and then you get Edgerrin a couple picks later, Lou, I know we'll be a little upset, but it's not a bad first 2 days to walk away from right there.
I will say, in a BPA world like this, if this is the board that you stick to, I don't hate 2 of the 3 picks. I wouldn't really love the Jackson Powers Johnson pick, but if you get Byron Murphy and Edgerrin Cooper in the first 2 rounds, like that's not bad.
Yeah, count me in with that all day long. And it's better than trading up for Graham Barton like Chad Reuter did in NFL's mock draft a couple weeks ago.
That's when I would lose my mind. Because, and again, if a really good interior offensive lineman falls in your lap in the second round, I'm just not going to love it, but I'm not going to freak out. If you're trading up and being aggressive in that way, yeah, I would lose my mind. I saw that mock draft, was not happy about it for sure. I like the way this mock's going so far, though. It's a BPA-centered mock draft. We're going to continue that with rounds 4 through 7 coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I've been told I'm a competitive person. I think Gino would probably attest to that. Mock Draft Monday. We had mock versus mock last week. Getting the votes coming. Everybody liked Gino's mock better than mine on YouTube. Fired me up a little bit, and that's why I love Monopoly Go as well. Got a competitive side of me, as we all do, and my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part, messing with your friends. You can charge them rent, I should say, on iconic properties, just like in classic Monopoly. But now you can also rob their vaults of riches for yourself, and their leaderboards show who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But that's not just our competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now, free on the Apple Store or Google Play.
As we roll along, this episode of LOE is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA. Sixers fans, I know you're roaring and ready to go for this play-in tournament. NHL playoffs are right around the corner. Baseball's in full swing. John Sterling, retired, longtime voice of the Yankees. Give a shout out to him. But right now, if you want to get in on the action and potentially win yourself some money, you got to go to FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. You don't even have to win or lose. You are going to get it guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in the app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network, LOE, and the #1 sportsbook in all of America.
All right, we're continuing on Mock Draft Monday right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. We're doing a BPA-style mock draft. So Gino and I, regardless of the Eagles' needs, we're sticking to, at the top of the board, when our pick is up, who is the best player available. For the Eagles this year, compared to previous years, Gino, where there were bigger needs, I'm actually more okay with this extreme approach we're taking because Byron Murphy from Texas was our first pick at 22, a really good defensive tackle that you could pair up with Jalen Carter, a good pass rusher, which is something we have questions about with Jordan Davis, and Milton Williams might only be here for another year. Then we got Jackson Powers Johnson, the center from Oregon at pick 50, then Edgerrin Cooper at pick 53, the linebacker from Texas A&M. So this year, actually, this mock draft, the way it's going, I wouldn't love the JPJ pick, but I kind of like the job. If this was like 2021 through 2023, there were more obvious needs to be had as you were still building this thing up, I think I would have a different opinion of this strategy or mindset. But so far, I like what we're doing.
And the thing is, you can always pick and choose examples throughout history of the Eagles when they've taken the approach in the right way, taking the approach in the wrong way. I mean,
sure.
Should they have went best player available when they drafted Marcus Smith? I would probably say so. That might have been the way to go about
Probably.
it. But
Yeah,
should they
right.
not have drafted for need when they drafted Danny Watkins? I would also agree. So it's a hit or miss approach. It is something that changes varying on what team you support. I mean, is the best player available for the Philadelphia Eagles right now the same for the Buffalo Bills, which is the same for the Indianapolis Colts? Absolutely not. Those are all going to differ. But we're just going off of this board right here, Lou. We are quite literally going off of the number. Who is the best player available? Do they fit the Eagles? Yes or no? And frankly, if not, you're going to find a way to make them work.
So again, if we're going to stick to BPA, in my opinion, I'm looking at some of these prospects at 120 in round 4. Mason Smith, the defensive tackle from LSU, is at the top of this board. Cade Stover, the tight end from Ohio State. Kalen King from Penn State, somebody I took in the second round of our first mock draft Monday, and people did not like it. Now it's caught up where his real value is. So around this pick would make some sense. Gino, I think it would be a position that doesn't make sense for the Eagles after paying Saquon Barkley, but I think Tennessee running back Jalen Wright, of all these guys, is probably the best player available. So if we're going to take this extreme approach and not consider positional value and need and all of that, I think Jalen Wright would probably be the pick.
It's easier in the beginning when the consensus, and there's so much data out there. And
right.
I think Arif Hassan will put out the consensus big board, and you get an average of where they see the top 75 guys. But after that, it's a crapshoot, man. I mean, we know, and I keep going back to the point that Jim Nagy made, that day 3 is going to be just big, throw your hands in the air, and teams will probably be trading a lot of picks because they don't know how great this day is. But, man, if you have the opportunity to add Jalen Wright, and I think he's going to be a guy who's probably overdrafted this year, one, because of the lack of day 3 talent, but that speed element.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, dude, talk about thunder and lightning, him and Saquon. I mean, would you take a 4th-round running back when you already have that guy in the building? I don't know, but it's very good for this exercise. Like, now you're going to have to get into that conversation of how you use both of those guys.
No, for sure. And that's why I wouldn't do it. And that's why, again, you have to consider other variables because, like, positional value, you don't invest at running back especially. You do not invest a big contract in a prime player and then a top 4-round pick in a player. So, but this is why I like doing this exercise because it's a good example of that. All right, Gino, you're up on the board here at 161.
So these are all positions that we have already addressed. I mean,
yeah, it's a lot of running backs, a lot of defensive tackles.
Look at defensive tackle. Let's kind of just continue to go down that road, though. Like, what if they do continue to just add at these positions based on best player available? Like, what if they went and took a Keith Randolph, like doubled up on the interior of their defensive line? Could they do that? 100%. I'm kind of going to go a little to the wayside and say they're going to try and do it for need, but let's go with a safety here, like Jalen Carlisle or Kenny Logan out of Kansas. You could take either of those guys. You could take Aaron Casey, the local kid out of Temple, somebody who didn't test as well as many people would hope, but you could also make the argument that he's a local kid, that the team likes him as well. But let's just kind of flip it on its head. We're going to go best player available and or at that position, so we go with the safety.
For sure. I think that would make some sense, and Jalen Carlisle gives you some depth. And yeah, overall, I think you're right, Gino. Once you get, at the end of round 4, it's rounds 5 through 7, it gets way less obvious who the BPA is.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that's what makes this part of the exercise a little bit more difficult, but at the same time, that's how you win drafts. I mean, that's how you get the Josh Sweats and you outdraft teams in day 4. Like, you have to find those gems that teams aren't willing to take looks at. And hey, hopefully he's one of them.
So I'm not doing this because he's a corner. I genuinely believe this player would be a steal at 171. I think cornerback from Louisville, Jarvis Brownlee, would make so much sense at 171. He would be my best player available. I thought more he's a end of round 3, early round 4 kind of guy, a little undersized, but he plays big. I think in this scenario, it would finally fit where there is an obvious need that fits with BPA. So I like Jarvis Brownlee from Louisville at 171, and then Gino's got pick 172.
There's also a lot of names on this board that I think would fit well for our conversation. Like Eric All, I don't think is the 172nd best player in this class. And same with Christian Boyd. I think he's going to get drafted a lot higher. And you look at Cedric Johnson, the edge rusher out of Ole Miss. I mean, I don't think he's going to be on the board either. But Lou, I'm looking at, if you want to scroll up just a little bit here.
Yeah.
I'm looking at one player in particular. I think he's far and away the best of the group, and you have already taken one. Like Gabe Hall, man, like that type of measurable on the interior. Yeah. Like you already,
he has
took
no business
one,
being there at 172.
But he has no business being there. Like, let's continue to add to this exercise. Like, is there that much of a difference between him and then let's say a wide receiver that you need, and or a corner, and or a safety? I take that player all day long, especially Lou, when you get into positional importance. Especially in day 3, like, I'm going to hold the interior defensive lineman even higher than I do on day 2 over the spread to the running backs, because it's like, if that back can't get into day 2, but in a deep defensive line class, this guy makes his way into to day 3. You have to look at that variance between the positions, right? And like Gabe Hall is so much better of a player than.
But see, and that's not BPA. Like everything you're talking about, it's such an in-depth, like back and forth about like positional value and depth of class, and that's what always drives me nuts. Because like what you just did is exactly a conversation they would have in a war room, and it's why I think people bother me so much with how simplified their approach.
Yeah, it's not just like you don't just
your breakdown there was exactly what people do.
Nope.
That's not what people say.
100%, man. And that's
all right.
At the same time, it's your board. How do you look at it? What position do you value? And Howie Roseman, if there's any GM that you can look at 13 years of data on, this guy can give you breadcrumbs. I mean, there is enough information that you're going to know what he likes at these positions, what he values, and where he's willing to take shots when it comes to measurables, when it comes to athletic testing. Those are the things that are going to help guys on day 3 jump that much higher.
For sure. All right, final pick here at 210. This is a guy that we take almost every single time, and at this point, he might as well be a Philadelphia Eagle. I think he's going to go a lot higher than round 6 at 210. Looking at this board, again, a lot of running backs, some safeties too. I think Jaquan Jackson from Tulane would make a ton of sense. He'd be my BPA, and we round this thing out, Gino, with a pretty solid class, honestly, even though it was a pretty extreme approach. Like if you came away with Byron Murphy, Jackson Powers-Johnson, Edgerrin Cooper, Jalen Wright, Jalen Carlisle, Jarvis Brownlee, Gabe Hall, and Jaquan Jackson, like that's probably a pretty good class, I'd imagine.
Good class, man. I know. And this is going to differ depending on what mock draft site you're on and what you value. I know there's different. I value safety higher than Lou values safety, and Lou values traits in a wide receiver that I might value in a different regard. And that's what makes scouting an art more than a perfect science. Because if it was a perfect science, Lou, teams could do this. They could put all the information into a computer, put it on auto draft like those episodes of the league back in the day, and then all of a sudden you walk out with a Super Bowl team. But that's not how this works, and that's what makes it art. And that's why you can't just say draft the best player available. That's not how the NFL works. And that's why Howie Roseman, even as good as he is, still not a perfect drafter.
No, for sure. And again, I think some people will probably say now, Lou, you're anti-BPA, and this draft, it crushed and it was BPA, but I think it would cause some, questions at like JPJ's spot and Jalen Wright at running back and, even Byron Murphy in round 1. But also the Eagles have, this year they have the flexibility of where they don't have a lot of immediate needs that no matter what, like Gino said, they just have to add good football players. And that doesn't mean, again, that you reach at certain spots. But I think this year they do have the flexibility of going for value and for position more than just, forcing things in a black and white perspective of need of BPA. So we'll see what they do. We've got one more week. We're going to do another mock draft this week, though, so stay tuned. Mock Draft Monday next week will not be our final mock draft. We're going to have a listener interaction one for sure, and then a couple others. So stay tuned right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. We got 4 more shows for you as well this week. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. That'll do it, though, for today's edition of Mock Draft Monday. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles fly.